Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that feels particularly relevant, maybe even a little frustratingly familiar to many of you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening will recognize some of this.
We're plunging into the question of why, despite all the advancements, the cutting-edge tools, sophisticated methodologies, all the knowledge we've gained, why software projects still fail way too often in 2025.
It's true. Budgets blow out, deadlines become, well, suggestions.
Right, and the finished product often doesn't actually delight users or, crucially, hit the business goals it was supposed to. It's a persistent paradox, isn't it?
It really is. Because on one hand, development teams today have access to tech and practices that were, frankly, unimaginable just a decade ago.
Like what specifically?
Well, they can deploy code multiple times a day. They can leverage huge cloud resources instantly, use AI for coding, testing.
A whole toolkit.
Exactly. And yet the fundamental success rate, and I mean success measured by delivering real value on time, within budget, it hasn't dramatically improved.
Which really makes you wonder, what's going on underneath?
It begs the question, what are the underlying causes? And our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack the source material you've provided. It takes a clear-eyed look at the modern culprits behind these failures.
Trying to distill the core issues, get some sharp insights.
That's the goal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the goal isn't just to, list common problems.
Mhm.
We want to understand why they persist, even
Okay.
with everything we have now.
Right.
So we're going to explore what the source describes as the illusion of progress, speed not equaling value.
A big one.
We'll dive into the performance of Agile theater,
Process over purpose.
confront the relentless damage from technical debt, the silent killer,
Always lurking.
examine how shifting business priorities can just clash violently with rigid code.
Yeah, the pivot problem.
We'll dissect that critical, but often flawed, prognoner role.
So much hinges on that.
Understand the drag from misaligned team incentives.
When teams pull in different directions.
See how sometimes we get too reliant on our fancy tools?
The shiny object syndrome.
Call out the magical thinking in project planning and risk management.
Or lack thereof.
Look how communication just breaks down as projects grow.
The stakeholder drift.
And finally, discuss that fundamental failure. Defining success way too late. Or maybe not at all.
Which loops back to the start, really.
It does.
And understanding these dynamics is, I think, incredibly valuable. It doesn't matter if you're a developer, a PM, a business stakeholder.
Or just someone affected by software projects, which is pretty much everyone these days.
Right. The source material really shifts the focus away from purely technical details. It shines a light on the behavioral, the organizational, the strategic issues.
The human stuff.
Often the real undoing of projects today. It pushes us to look beyond the surface answers.
Okay, so let's do that. The source kicks off by highlighting this central paradox. Teams can move incredibly fast now, but speed doesn't automatically mean effectiveness.
That's right. The observation is spot on. Development teams have become incredibly proficient at generating output.
Output? Okay, like code. Features.
Yeah, think about it. Continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD pipelines are everywhere now. Automated testing frameworks let you validate super quickly.
Cloud infrastructure is instant.
Exactly. Teams can commit code, run tests, build, deploy to production. Sometimes in minutes or hours, they can ship software bits constantly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that sounds like progress. I mean, if a team is deploying multiple times a week, maybe even daily,
Yeah.
and their metrics, deployment frequency or lead time for changes, they look amazing. How can they not be delivering value? It feels like rapid delivery must equal rapid progress.
And that's precisely the illusion of progress the source is identifying. It feels right, but it can be misleading.
How so?
Because those metrics, deployment frequency, commit velocity, lines of code, even sprint burn down velocity, they all measure activity. They measure momentum.
Okay, they show the team is busy doing stuff.
Yes, and doing it quickly. And look, having efficient pipelines and processes, that absolutely enables value delivery. It's necessary.
But not sufficient.
Exactly. The source's critical point is that these can become vanity stats if they're disconnected from actual business outcomes or user impact.
Ah, okay, so you're shipping code, great, but is that code actually moving a key business metric?
Right. Is it solving a real user problem? Is it driving revenue, reducing costs, boosting engagement? Is it hitting the strategic goal the project started for?
If not, then the speed is just churning things out.
It can be. Which leads to this use case the source mentions, the feature factory trap.
Right, tell us about that. What does that look like?
This is a really common and honestly quite frustrating trap. The source describes a team, maybe working on a SaaS product,
Okay.
that has fully embraced all the modern dev practices. They deploy new features or updates every single week, sometimes even more often.
Wow, okay. Sounds impressive.
It does. Their CI/CD setup is slick, automated test coverage is high, sprint velocity looks healthy, stand-ups are quick, code reviews happen. By every measure of delivery speed, they look like rock stars.
They feel busy, they're busy, hitting all those internal process targets. Sounds good.
Exactly. They're a well-oiled feature production machine. But, and this is like the crucial note thing, when you look outside the engineering metrics.
Of the business metrics, user metrics.
Yes. You see a totally different story. User adoption for these shiny new features, flat. Overall, user engagement with the product, not growing.
Oh.
Key business indicators, customer retention, conversion rates, average revenue per user, maybe they aren't improving. Maybe they're even declining slightly.
So the features are technically sound, delivered on time.
Delivered promptly, but they just aren't being used in a way that makes any meaningful difference to the customer or moves the needle for the business.
So day to day, that team probably feels like they're winning. Their sprint demos show off new stuff constantly. Jira tickets are flying across the board to done.
Absolutely. High fives all around, probably.
But the cold reality, reflected in things like monthly active users or actual feature usage data or those high-level business KPIs, shows all that activity isn't translating into results.
Precisely. Their internal metrics of output look great. Their external metrics of outcome are stagnant or poor.
Why do teams fall into this? The source must offer some reasons.
It's multifaceted, really. Often it's intense organizational pressure to just show something, show movement, keep developers busy maybe, rather than strategically focused.
Right, the appearance of progress.
Or a lack of clear, fast feedback loops from real users or the market. Or fundamentally defining success wrong from the start.
How so?
Well, if success is defined as shipping the feature, then you celebrate shipping the feature, even if it has zero impact. Success achieved, right? Box ticked.
Instead of defining success as the feature achieving X impact.
Exactly. That's the disconnect the source keeps coming back to, that powerful takeaway. Shipping velocity of business value.
It's such a critical reframe. It challenges how so many places still measure development success.
It really does.
So for you, listening right now, whether you're on a team, managing one, or you're a stakeholder, what does this mean for how you should evaluate project success?
It suggests looking beyond just the speed, demanding clarity on the impact.
Right. It forces that harder conversation about what metrics truly matter.
Are we measuring lines of code or lives improved? Features shipped or problems actually solved?
It requires that discipline, doesn't it? Tying development effort directly to expected, measurable outcomes, and then actually checking if those outcomes happened.
It's a shift from output-focused to outcome-focused thinking. It's harder, no doubt. Output is easier to measure, easier to control, but it's essential to avoid getting stuck in that feature factory.
Okay, so building on that idea, rapid delivery not automatically meaning value the source, then zooms in on the processes we use. Specifically, Agile. It's everywhere in 2025, right? Everyone's doing Agile.
Pretty much the standard, yes. But that widespread adoption, the source argues, has created its own set of problems. Specifically, Agile theater.
Agile theater. I like that phrase. What does it mean?
It means teams and organizations adopt the rituals, the terms, the surface level stuff of Agile frameworks like Scrum or Kanban.
The stand-ups, the sprints.
Exactly. But they fail to really internalize or consistently apply the underlying principles, the mindset.
So it becomes process over purpose.
Precisely. They are performing the process, but not truly embodying its purpose, like actors on a stage.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just about speed, not just about having a process, but is the process itself actually working? Or is it just for show?
That's the core question.
So teams are doing daily stand-ups, sprint planning, reviews, retrospectives. What's missing if it's just theater?
They're missing the heart of it. Things like genuine, continuous product discovery based on actual user needs. Deep, ongoing collaboration with business stakeholders who have real authority.
Not just occasional updates.
Right, a living, shared understanding of the long-term product vision. And crucially, consistent reflection and adaptation based on real-world feedback and validated learning. Not just tweaking the process slightly.
So the rituals happen, but the important conversations about what are we building, who is it for, why does it align with strategy, those are superficial. Or just skipped.
Often, yes. The backlog might be perfectly groomed in Jira, but Are the items in it rigorously validated against user needs or business goals? Maybe not.
The source gives a really vivid use case for this. The Scrum Zombie teams. That name alone.
Yeah.
Wow. Describe what that looks like.
Okay, the Scrum Zombie team is the ultimate embodiment of Agile theater. This team follows every single prescribed ceremony and artifact of Scrum perfectly. Like textbook, perfect. Totally. Daily 15-minute stand-ups. What I did, what I'll do, any blockers, check. Sprint planning sessions. Structure, tickets estimated meticulously with story points, check. Burn down charts, generated and reviewed, check.
Sprint reviews showing off the work.
Religiously, and retrospectives at the end of every sprint focus purely on process improvement.
Like, let's make stand-ups shorter or improve ticket descriptions.
Exactly those kinds of things. They are executing the how flawlessly, but they never pause to question the fundamental what or why. They're given a backlog and they execute it diligently, sprint after sprint.
Do they talk to users?
Maybe not directly. Or their input is heavily filtered. The business stakeholders giving requirements might not have a clear, unified vision themselves.
So the team just becomes a ticket processing machine.
A highly efficient one. But they process items regardless of whether those items are actually valuable or meet market needs. They're zombies because they're going through the motions perfectly, but the underlying purpose, building a successful product, is dead or was never really alive.
And the source describes a pretty devastating consequence of this perfect process execution, right?
It's brutal. The scenario is, after 2 full years of diligently following every Agile ceremony, being a poster child for doing Scrum right, the application they built gets shut down.
Shut down. Why?
Lack of market traction. 2 years of work, significant investment, executed with process perfection, resulting in complete product failure.
Because the core idea was flawed, or the market didn't want it.
Exactly. Or it just didn't solve a real problem effectively. The process was a success, you could argue, but the project was an abject failure.
And their perfect adherence to the process actually prevented them from finding that out earlier.
That's the irony. The focus on executing the process without engaging in the critical thinking and external validation that true Agile principles demand stopped them from discovering the fatal flaw until it was way too late.
2 years. Just think of the resources, the effort, the opportunity cost. It's staggering. Why does this Agile theater happen so often? Is it just pressure to conform?
That's definitely part of it. Being Agile is table stakes now. Organizations often focus on adopting the visible practices because they're easier to implement than, say, changing the underlying culture or mindset.
Easier to mandate stand-ups than foster genuine collaboration.
Right. And maybe there's a lack of real training on the principles behind Agile customer collaboration, responding to change, working software as the primary measure of progress.
So the checklist of ceremonies becomes the goal itself.
It can, yeah. It replaces the actual objective of delivering valuable outcomes. It's frankly easier to run a stand-up than to have a difficult conversation about whether the feature you're building is actually needed by anyone.
So the source's key takeaway here is pretty stark. Agile is not immunity from failure. Process without strategy, without reflection, without that connection to reality. It's just performance art.
Well put.
For you, listening, if you're in a project that feels like it might just be going through the motions, what questions should you or your team be asking to break free from this Agile theater?
You need to challenge the foundations. Ask,
Yeah.
who are our actual users? When did we last talk to them or watch them use our product?
Seriously, when?
How do items get into our backlog? Are they prioritized based on validated value or just internal politics? How do we know if something we built succeeded after release?
Good question.
Are we as a team empowered to challenge requirements that seem iffy? Are our retrospectives leading to changes in what we build, not just how we build it?
Those are fundamental questions. Process alone won't answer them.
But a truly Agile mindset demands you ask them.
That's a really powerful distinction. Okay, moving from process, the source then tackles something that sounds technical to technical debt, but frames it very differently, as a silent killer.
Indeed. Technical debt is still one of the most persistent, most damaging factors in project failure, even now in 2025, with all our modern tools.
Okay, let's talk about tech debt. It sounds like something only developers worry about, maybe buried deep in the code. But the source says, no, this isn't just code stuff. It's actively killing teams. How does the source define it? Why is it so insidious?
It's defined as the inevitable result of taking shortcuts now to get speed or hit a deadline now. consciously or unconsciously.
Shortcuts like what?
Like skipping writing good automated tests, ignoring established architecture guidelines because, hey, this other way is quicker right now, applying temporary quick fixes to bugs instead of finding the root cause,
Patching things up.
or duplicating code because there's no time to build a proper reusable component. These are design choices, implementation choices that feel easier or faster in the moment. But they make the software much harder, much more costly to change or maintain later. It's exactly like taking out a high-interest loan. You get the cash now, but the repayments later are painful.
And this debt, the source says, it doesn't just sit there. It accumulates. It actively causes problems down the road. What kind of problems?
The consequences are severe, and they compound over time. First, the obvious one. It cripples future speed. As the code base gets tangled, complex, unstable because of all the debt,
Everything takes longer.
everything takes longer. Adding new features, modifying old ones. Developers spend ages just trying to understand brittle code, fixing bugs caused by unexpected side effects, working around existing problems instead of on new value.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, it massively lowers team morale. I mean, no developer enjoys working in a code base that feels like a minefield, right? Where every change is risky and frustrating.
Leads to burnout.
Absolutely, and makes it hard to keep good people. Third, it stifles innovation. The team is constantly firefighting, fixing yesterday's problems. There's no time, no energy left to explore new tech or build genuinely cool, innovative stuff. It's a vicious cycle.
The use case provided, the startup code collapse,
Yeah.
sounds like it makes this very real. Can you describe that scenario?
Yeah, it's a classic. Imagine a health tech startup. Growing fast, huge pressure in the early days to get users, show progress to investors.
Ship features at all costs.
Exactly. So they knowingly take on technical debt. They tell themselves, we'll clean it up later when we have more time. Famous last words.
Uh-oh.
They build features using whatever method is fastest right now. The code base becomes this complex tangle. The source calls it duct-taped code.
So it works,
Mhm.
kind of, but underneath it's fragile, messy.
Precisely. And for a while, maybe that seems okay. They're growing, but as the company scales, more users, more complexity, the debt starts calling. The system becomes unstable, frequent outages, critical bugs start popping up, maybe data integrity issues, security problems, scary stuff in health tech.
Yeah, really scary.
The dev team is just overwhelmed, constantly fixing these fires, which are hard to track down in the messy code. Meetings become dominated by talk of instability and this daunting prospect of needing to rewrite everything because the foundation is crumbling.
And the team.
Facing this constant uphill battle, firefighting, severe burnout.
That human cost, the developer burnout, that's critical. It goes way beyond just the code itself, connecting tech debt directly to morale, to talent retention. It makes total sense. If your best engineers are just fixing messes, they'll leave.
I often do.
So why is it so hard for businesses, for teams, to prioritize fixing this debt now? The long-term cost seems obvious when you lay it out like this.
It's fundamentally a conflict, isn't it? Short-term pressure versus long-term health.
Explain that.
Reducing technical debt means spending developer time on tasks that don't immediately produce shiny new features. It's an investment in the future, in stability, in future speed.
And that's a hard sell.
It can be incredibly hard. Try convincing stakeholders focused on hitting this quarter's market deadline or delivering that feature promise to a big customer that you need to slow down to clean up code. It requires leadership to truly understand and value the long-term agility and stability that comes from managing debt proactively.
And without that understanding,
The immediate pressure to deliver new stuff almost always wins. And the cycle continues. The debt keeps growing.
so the source's core message here is unavoidable. Speed without stability is a time bomb. Managing tech debt refactoring, building resilience, it has to be part of the roadmap, not optional.
Non-negotiable.
For teams or individuals seeing this debt piling up, how can they effectively advocate for addressing it, especially when that pressure to just ship is so high?
You have to frame it not just as a technical problem, but as a business risk, a business cost.
Translate it into their language.
Exactly. Articulate the impact in terms leadership understands. The cost of downtime from outages, the cost of slower feature delivery later, the cost of lost revenue from users hitting bugs, the cost of losing your best developers to burnout.
Quantify it, if possible.
Even roughly, yes. Quantifying helps make the case that investing in paying down debt is a necessary business investment in future capability and stability. It takes courage, though. You have to raise the issue consistently and clearly articulate the long-term consequences.
That's a crucial skill, translating tech issues into business impact. Okay, shifting gears slightly. The source also points out that sometimes the problem isn't just the code or the process in isolation. It's the tension between a dynamic business and rigid software.
Absolutely. Businesses operate in constantly changing markets. They need to pivot strategies, introduce new models, target different customers.
They have to adapt.
Right. The challenge is that software systems, especially those built fast without thinking about future adaptability, can become incredibly rigid, resistant to those necessary changes.
So you might have okay code, maybe a decent process, but then the business itself needs to swerve dramatically. What happens then?
What often happens is pivot paralysis, as the source calls it.
Pivot paralysis, okay.
Architectural decisions, design choices made early on, based on the business needs at that specific time, they get baked into the software structure.
Deeply embedded.
Yes. And those assumptions, maybe valid back then, become huge liabilities when the business landscape shifts. The software just wasn't built to handle a fundamental change easily. Roadmaps based on the old strategy are suddenly useless, but the code base itself can't quickly realign.
The pivot paralysis use case sounds like a perfect and probably painful example. Describe that scenario.
Okay, picture a company. They initially built a successful product purely for the B2C market, business to consumer.
Selling to individuals.
Right. The software was built with assumptions about individual user accounts, simple transaction flows, maybe consumer-grade databases, UI designed for single users. You get the picture.
Makes sense for B2C.
Then the business spots a huge opportunity in the B2B space, business to business. They decide to pivot or offer an enterprise version.
Okay, logical business move.
Yeah.
But the code base built for consumers, how does it handle needing to serve entire businesses?
Poorly in this scenario. The core assumptions baked in for B2C data models optimized for millions of individuals, not organizations. Authentication for single logins, not teams with permissions. Billing for credit cards, not complex enterprise invoicing.
All totally different.
Completely different and deeply ingrained in the code. So trying to adapt this B2C code base to the fundamentally different B2B requirements. It's not just adding a few features. It means redesigning core components. The architecture, functional for B2C, is just too rigid for B2B needs.
So instead of adapting relatively easily, the effort required is massive.
Immense. The source says trying to shoehorn B2B needs into the B2C structure is like, well, square peg, round hole. Adapting becomes almost as complex, costly, and time-consuming as building a whole new B2B system from scratch.
Hence paralysis at a critical moment for the business.
Exactly. The existing code, maybe not full of debt in the messy sense, is just structurally rigid relative to the new business direction.
Why does software often end up so rigid? Is it just impossible to predict the future?
It's not necessarily about predicting specific future features. It's more often a lack of focus on designing for change itself.
How do you do that?
Well, pressure to deliver the initial features fast often means less time invested in creating a modular, well-architected system. Clear boundaries between different parts, maybe reflecting business domains, not enough upfront thought about types of change or how to isolate areas likely to change from stable core parts.
So designing for the current known requirement is just easier and faster.
It is, than designing a system that can flex for potential future needs or whole new business models.
So the source's takeaway is vital. Software must be designed for change, not just for initial delivery. What does design for change actually mean in practice for developers, for architects?
It means embracing design principles that prioritize flexibility. Things like domain-driven design to structure software around business concepts, using clear APIs and interfaces so components can be swapped or modified independently, building with modularity so changes don't ripple uncontrollably.
That's like good practice anyway.
It is. And it also means constant communication with the business side to understand potential future directions, building systems that aren't brittle when those directions inevitably shift. It's an investment in long-term agility.
Building scaffolding for an unknown future. Makes sense. Okay, let's shift focus again. To a specific role, the source highlights as incredibly important, foundational, even but often where big problems start. The product owner or product manager.
Yes, the source argues that the effectiveness or lack thereof of this role is a major predictor of project outcome. And too often, they aren't set up for success.
Right, the source really digs into the people side here, specifically the product owner role. What's the core problem identified?
Well, the frameworks define the product owner as the key decision maker for what gets built, right? The voice of the customer, the voice of the business, accountable for maximizing value.
Sounds crucial.
It is, but the reality in many organizations is very different. Many POs lack true authority to make final priority calls. They might not have direct, unfiltered access to users or key business data.
They're stuck in the middle.
Often, yes. Pulled in conflicting directions by different internal stakeholders, they end up becoming, as the source implies, just administrators of a backlog list, managing tickets, not strategically driving product outcomes.
So they have the title, the responsibility,
Yeah.
but not the actual power or clarity.
Exactly. And this lack of empowerment, lack of a clear mandate creates huge dysfunction. It's a major reason projects fail.
What are the consequences?
Numerous. The roadmap becomes unstable, constantly shifting as different stakeholders flex their muscles. The team gets conflicting requests. Marketing wants this, sales needs that. The CEO has a new pet idea. Total chaos. The PO, lacking authority to synthesize or push back, tries to please everyone. The backlog becomes fragmented. Uncertainty kills team morale and focus, and crucially, with no single person truly empowered to say, this is the priority, here's why, accountability for the overall product outcome gets fuzzy, diluted.
The confused prioritization use case sounds like the lived nightmare of many dev teams. Can you paint that picture?
Okay, imagine a product team trying to execute a sprint. The PO presents the plan for the next 2 weeks. Halfway through, bam. Urgent request comes in, pushed by a powerful exec. Immediate shift in focus required.
Dropping everything.
Pretty much. The feature the team was working hard on, suddenly deprioritized, or its requirements changed dramatically. And this isn't a one-off, it happens repeatedly. The roadmap for the next sprint, supposedly agreed just days ago, totally up in the air again.
So the team is constantly changing course, maybe abandoning work they already started.
Exactly. Constant context switching, wasted effort on abandoned tasks, and deep frustration, feeling like they're chasing a moving target.
They lose trust.
Completely. Trust in the roadmap, trust in the prioritization process. It all seems arbitrary, based on who shouts loudest, not a clear strategy. It's impossible to build momentum or feel your work matters in that environment.
Sounds utterly exhausting. It really highlights how critical that PO role is when it is effective. The source's takeaway is firm. A strong, empowered product owner is foundational. Not a luxury, not just admin.
Absolutely foundational.
So what makes a PO strong and empowered based on the source's implications? And what kind of organizational support do they absolutely need?
Strength and empowerment mean having the clear authority to make decisions about the backlog and priorities, including the authority to say no to requests that don't align with the strategy.
Saying no is key.
Crucial. It also means direct access to customers, users, business data to inform those decisions, not just relying on filtered info.
And organizationally.
Leadership has to explicitly back the PO's decisions. Create a structure where all product-related requests, conflicting demands get channeled through the PO. No end runs directly to the team.
Protect the process.
And trust the PO to synthesize input and make the best calls for the product, then hold them accountable for outcomes, not just for managing a list.
That's a powerful statement about needing real authority. Okay, expanding the view beyond just one role. The source also highlights friction when different teams involved aren't aiming for the same definition of success.
Right. This brings us to the issue of misaligned incentives, conflicting goals across different functions.
So it's not just the PO. What about dev, QA, UX, the business folks? Misaligned incentives causing major problems. What does that actually look like on a project?
It looks like different groups being measured, rewarded based on conflicting objectives. For instance, the dev team might be pushed, incentivized, celebrated for maximizing velocity, shipping code fast, completing story points.
Goal, speed.
Meanwhile, the quality assurance team, QA, their incentive is finding bugs, preventing issues reaching production. Their goal, stability. Defect reduction.
Quality, already a potential conflict.
Right. Then you have the user experience, UX, design team. They want time for thorough research, iterating on designs, ensuring the product is intuitive, delightful. Goal, polish, usability.
Goal, user happiness, needs time.
And leadership. They might be focused on hitting specific demo days for investors or achieving a high-level business KPI by a certain date. Goal, milestones, business targets.
So everyone's optimizing their own piece, but the pieces don't necessarily fit together smoothly.
Exactly. It creates inherent friction, conflict. The velocity versus quality use case is a classic.
How does that play out?
Dev team, pushed by their velocity goal, feels pressure maybe to cut corners on testing or docs to get code out faster. QA team, focused on stability, catches the bugs, pushes the code back, slows things down.
Friction.
UX team feels rushed because deadlines are set based on dev speed, not allowing enough time for proper design work or user feedback loops. Leadership gets frustrated by delays from QA or UX, even though those delays might be needed for a good overall product.
The source says no one wins.
And it's accurate. Everyone feels pressure, frustration. The overall goal gets lost in the departmental crossfire.
Why does this fragmentation happen? Seems obviously counterproductive.
Often stems from traditional org structures. Departments in silos, each with its own leadership, its own metrics optimized for that function in isolation.
Siloed KPIs.
Yes, KPIs designed without enough thought about how they interact or conflict with other parts of the delivery lifecycle. There's a lack of a truly shared definition of project success that cuts across departments, one that aligns everyone towards a single outcome benefiting the user and the business.
So the source's takeaway is critical. Success requires shared goals, cross-functional alignment, not competing KPIs. How can organizations or teams actually move towards these truly shared goals? What does real alignment look like?
It requires defining success upfront in terms of measurable business outcomes or user impacts, things that every team contributes to and is jointly accountable for.
So shift the metrics.
Yes. Instead of devs measured purely on velocity or QA on bugs found, link everyone's performance, incentives to things like increase user conversion by X% or improve customer satisfaction by Y points or reduce operational costs by Z%.
Shared outcome goals.
Exactly. Real alignment looks like cross-functional teams working together daily, understanding how their specific tasks feed into these shared outcomes. Having open talks about trade-offs based on the overall goal, not just optimizing their piece.
And leadership has to drive this.
Leadership absolutely has to establish and reinforce these shared goals constantly.
That shift from departmental optimization to shared outcome optimization.
Yeah.
Seems fundamental. Okay, now let's turn to something that feels like it should be a solution, not a problem. Tools. We have incredible dev tools now, but the source suggests over-reliance on them can actually hurt.
Yeah, this point highlights a trap where teams invest heavily in sophisticated tech and process tools, but lose sight of the fundamental human and strategic stuff that really drives success.
Okay, we've hit process, people, incentives. Now tools. We have amazing tools in 2025. CI/CD, Jira, Slack, observability platforms. How can having all this great tech possibly be a problem? Seems backward.
It does, doesn't it? And the source isn't saying tools are bad. Far from it. They're essential for efficient modern development.
So what's the issue?
The problem is when teams become over-reliant on them, or focus on perfecting the use of the tool rather than the underlying purpose the tool serves.
Like mastering Jira workflows becomes the goal.
Exactly. Or spending enormous energy optimizing build pipelines, automating every conceivable test, while neglecting crucial non-tool activities.
Such as
Deeply understanding user needs, actively gathering and synthesizing feedback, having clear, consistent communication with stakeholders, ruthlessly prioritizing work based on actual value, not just what fits neatly into the tool's workflow.
So they become masters of the tools, the internal processes,
Yeah.
but disconnected from the external reality. Users, business needs.
Precisely. They build a technically impressive, highly automated system for building software, but lose sight of who it's for and why they're building it. The tool-driven black hole use case illustrates this perfectly.
Tool-driven black hole. Sounds ominous. Tell us about that scenario.
Okay, imagine a team. Technically brilliant. They pride themselves on their state-of-the-art tech stack, their perfectly optimized CI/CD pipeline, comprehensive automated tests, meticulously configured project management tools.
The works.
The works. They spend significant time debating the best tools, configuring them, optimizing their internal processes around these tools. There's a real sense of accomplishment in the team as they perfect build times, reduce test duration, ensure every ticket flows flawlessly through their chosen tool.
They are technically top-notch, process-wise perfect.
Yes. However, this intense internal focus comes at the expense of external engagement. They spend very little time actually talking to end users. Maybe they don't have robust ways to collect and analyze user feedback beyond a generic suggestion box. Maybe they don't sync regularly with business stakeholders beyond quick, perfunctory updates. Their prioritization might be driven by technical stuff or internal estimates in their tool, not validated user needs or changing business goals.
And the outcome. After all this focus on optimizing the tools and internal process.
The source describes the resulting product as beautifully built but ultimately irrelevant.
Ouch.
Yeah. The software works perfectly, technically, delivered via a seamless pipeline, managed through a pristine tool workflow. But it doesn't solve a real-world user problem, or it solves the wrong one, or it's based on outdated assumptions.
Built perfectly, but the wrong thing was built.
Exactly. The tools amplified the team's efficiency at building. But because the intent was focused inward on process, on tech, not outward on delivering value, the result was a highly optimized failure.
That's a powerful, sobering thought. Perfect execution of the wrong plan. Why do teams fall into this trap? Is it just tools are easier to deal with than messy humans?
That's a big factor, I think. Tools offer tangible problems with clear solved states. Configure a server, write a script, optimize a query, concrete tasks, measurable completion.
Right.
Engaging in deep user research, synthesizing conflicting stakeholder feedback, navigating organizational politics. Much messier, less predictable, feels less technical.
So you retreat to the controllable world of tools.
Sometimes, yeah. Maybe coupled with a belief, perhaps subconscious, that the tools themselves will magically compensate for shortcomings in strategy, communication, or user understanding.
The source's key takeaway cuts right through that. Tools amplify intent, they don't replace it. If your intent isn't focused on delivering value, tools just help you sail faster, more efficiently.
Precisely.
So what are those fundamental non-tool activities that teams need to prioritize of both or alongside tool investment?
The source really emphasizes fundamentals like relentless focus on understanding and validating user needs, direct interaction, data analysis, establishing clear, continuous communication channels with all relevant stakeholders, building a shared outcome-focused strategy everyone gets, and fostering a culture of continuous learning and adaptation based on real-world results, not just internal process metrics.
Those are the foundations. The intent, the tools should amplify.
Exactly.
That's a critical perspective shift. Okay, now let's talk about how projects get planned initially, or maybe how they don't get planned effectively. The course points out a common pitfall: magical thinking in planning and risk management.
Yes. This refers to that widespread tendency to create plans and timelines based on just pure optimism, downplaying obstacles, failing to realistically confront risks.
So even if you're focused on the right things, using tools well, if the initial plan itself is built on wishful thinking, you're in trouble from day one. Magical thinking, what did that look like?
It starts with timelines, often set based on desires, external pressure, competitive urgency, not a thorough bottom-up estimate of the actual work and known uncertainties.
Hope is a strategy.
Pretty much. And risks, dependencies on other teams, integration challenges, unclear requirements, key people availability, they often aren't properly identified, assessed for impact, or planned for with contingencies.
Just assumed away.
There's an implicit assumption that everything will go smoothly, or that any problems can be magically overcome without hitting the schedule or budget.
So the plan basically assumes the absolute best case scenario is the only scenario.
That's a good way to put it.
Great.
And crucially, when problems do inevitably arise because complex software development is inherently unpredictable, the initial response is often denial. Yeah. Instead of pausing, reevaluating the plan based on reality, acknowledging the delay, rethinking scope, asking for more resources, there's immense pressure from leadership or stakeholders to just stay on track. Red flags raised by the team about hurdles or unforeseen complexity get minimized, dismissed, because they threaten the predetermined, optimistic timeline.
This sounds like a dangerous cycle. The analysis seems to be it's often driven by external pressure, maybe fear of admitting difficulty or past miscalculations, or just lack of experience in realistic estimation.
All of the above. The desire for a smooth path overrides facing the messy reality. It's easier to pretend the initial timeline is achievable than to have that tough conversation about needing more time, more budget, or less scope.
The magical thinking is the hope that somehow, despite the evidence, it'll all just work out. Or the team can just work miracles later.
Exactly that. We'll make up the time later.
The deadline denial use case in the source sounds painfully common. Describe that one.
Okay, picture a big, high-profile enterprise project, non-negotiable external deadline, maybe regulatory, maybe a market event. The initial timeline was aggressive, but okayed under pressure.
Sounds familiar.
3 months in, the team hits major, unexpected technical snags integrating with a crucial legacy system, core data source. This unforeseen complexity immediately puts them behind schedule.
Okay, major obstacle early on. What should happen?
Best practice says, hit the brakes. Reassess seriously, negotiate scope reduction, push the deadline if possible, allocate more resources, accept the budget hit, face reality.
But in deadline denial,
Leadership refuses to acknowledge the severity, refuses to adjust the plan. The team is just told, work harder, find a way, catch up. Red flags from tech leads are downplayed. The optimistic timeline remains the official target.
They just keep pushing forward, ignoring the roadblock.
Yes. And by month 8, what's the inevitable outcome?
Disaster.
Pretty much. The magical thinking failed. The team couldn't miraculously overcome the complexity through sheer effort. The initial delay compounded, maybe made worse by rushed work trying to catch up, creating more tech debt.
Vicious cycle again.
Right. The project is now drastically off schedule. Budget is blown because adjustments weren't made early. Trust with stakeholders who were told things were on track is shattered. What could have been a manageable adjustment early on becomes a full-blown crisis, often leading to cancellation or a severely compromised product delivered late and way over budget.
Devastating. All from not facing reality early. The source's takeaway seems clear. Honest risk talks, flexible planning, infinitely better than rigid optimism. What are the warning signs a project might be suffering from deadline denial or magical thinking?
Signs like schedules with no basis in actual estimation, resistance to identifying or documenting risks, dismissing team concerns as just negativity, planning sessions that only focus on the ideal path, a total lack of contingency planning.
And how can teams foster a culture where talking about risks and challenges openly isn't punished?
Leadership has to explicitly signal that raising problems isn't complaining, it's valuable. It helps avoid future failure. Treat early problem identification as a chance to course correct, not a reason to blame. Build realistic buffers into plans, maybe even celebrate when those buffers aren't needed instead of seeing them as wasted time up front.
Create that psychological safety, where problems are puzzles to solve together, not secrets to hide. Okay, let's move to another disconnection. Communication breakdown, especially as projects grow.
Yes, the problem of stakeholder drift and the communication gaps that result. It highlights how vital, consistent, clear information flow is and how easily it erodes as more people get involved or time passes.
So even with realistic planning, if people aren't talking effectively, things still go wrong. Stakeholder drift, what does that mean exactly?
It describes how, over a project's life, especially longer or bigger ones, the connections between the core delivery team and the various stakeholders tend to weaken. They drift apart. Executives engaged at the start might get less involved day to day, lose touch with development realities or changing user needs. The core dev team might lose context about market shifts or new info from sales or support. And crucially, the connection to actual end users can fade, become indirect, filtered through layers.
So everyone ends up in their own little bubble about the project, not staying connected.
Exactly. And when people are in these bubbles, information doesn't flow well. Key decisions get made in isolation without necessary input. Old assumptions aren't challenged by new info. Feedback loops essential for validating what's being built get broken or become slow and distorted.
And this breakdown is a primary reason teams build the wrong thing.
A huge reason why teams end up building something that doesn't align with what's actually needed by the time it's delivered.
The communication cascade failure use case sounds like a perfect and sadly relatable example of a broken feedback loop. Describe that.
Okay, imagine a user hits a significant usability issue or bug. They contact customer support, explain the problem, support logs it, maybe categorizes it, adds notes. Standard procedure. Then that info goes into a queue, maybe a report reviewed periodically by a support manager. The manager synthesizes feedback from multiple users, passes a summary to the product manager. The PM incorporates this into the backlog, it gets prioritized, eventually picked up by dev in a future sprint.
So the user's original feedback travels through multiple handoffs, filters.
Exactly. By the time the info finally reaches the dev team, weeks, maybe months have passed. The original nuance, the user's workflow, the context of why it was frustrating, potentially lost in the cascade. It's secondhand, third-hand, fourth-hand info.
And the dev team acts on this potentially stale or incomplete info.
Right. And the consequence when they finally implement a fix or change based on that feedback,
It misses the mark.
often, yeah. Because the info was filtered, delayed, maybe distorted, the fix they implement, while technically addressing the reported issue, might not solve the user's actual current problem or improve their overall experience. The slow, indirect cascade meant the team operated on stale data, wasted effort, continued user frustration.
The distance prevents that quick, informed adaptation needed.
Totally.
The source's takeaway is unambiguous. Clear, direct feedback loops and regular, intentional stakeholder syncs are absolutely essential. To prevent this drift, avoid those costly late surprises. What are practical ways projects can fight this tendency towards drift and communication failure, especially as they scale?
You have to build intentional bridges. Establish direct channels for devs, designers, PMs to interact directly with actual users' interviews, usability testing, maybe even listening in on support calls.
Get closer to the source.
Yes. Implement regular, structured ways for the core team to update key stakeholders on progress, challenges, learning, and just as important, for stakeholders to provide current context and feedback directly back to the team.
Two-way street.
Absolutely. Proactive cross-functional working sessions to ensure alignment isn't just assumed, but actively maintained. Make communication a prioritized activity, not an afterthought. Create systems that push relevant info and feedback directly to the people who need it.
Actively fight the forces pulling everyone apart. Makes sense. Okay, finally, the source brings us back to something deeply connected to that first issue, the illusion of progress. The fundamental question of how you know if your project actually succeeded.
And the source points out that far too many projects reach completion without ever having clearly defined what success truly looks like in terms of business or user impact.
Okay, this really feels like it loops right back to the start.
Yeah.
How do you know if all that effort, budget, time actually resulted in success?
The source highlights that often a clear, agreed-upon definition of success just isn't established up front, or it's defined too late after tons of development is done. And even when there is a definition, it's frequently centered on internal technical output-based stuff.
Like success equals, we launched the feature.
Exactly. Or the software is live, the system is stable, we completed all the planned tickets. Task completion as success.
So success defined by launching code, not by the impact of that code.
Precisely. The feature release with no impact, use case we touched on earlier, is the direct result. Team works hard, builds, launches a new feature, high fives again.
Celebration.
Then months later, you look at the business metrics, user behavior data. Nothing. No discernible improvement. The feature might be technically fine, but it didn't boost engagement, didn't drive conversion, didn't cut support calls, didn't improve efficiency, whatever the hoped-for, perhaps implicit, goal was.
So when someone asks, did that feature succeed? Or even, why did we build it?
The only honest answer is often, because it was on the roadmap, or because we said we would.
That's a brutal reality. So
Yeah.
much effort, functionally, nothing meaningful. The analysis points to root causes like lack of clear product strategy from leadership, weak product owner role again.
Could be either or both. Or just a pervasive organizational culture that prioritizes visible output over validated outcome.
Output is just easier to measure.
It is. Easier to show progress on in the short term. Show a list of completed features, a burn-down chart. Measuring and validating outcomes takes more effort, patience, cross-functional work. Without a strong discipline to define success by outcome, the default is measuring the easy thing, output.
The source's key takeaway feels like a fundamental principle, yet surprisingly often missed. Define success early. Define it in business and user terms, not just technical ones. Code that doesn't move relevant metrics is basically wasted effort.
Couldn't agree more.
So what kind of metrics should teams and organizations focus on to define and measure real project success, according to this perspective?
Focus on metrics that are external-facing, reflecting impact on users or the business, things like user adoption rates for key features, conversion rates for critical workflows, customer retention or churn improvements, revenue generated or costs saved attributable to the software,
Actual results.
task completion rates, or time on task for users doing key things, reduction in support volume for specific issues, improvements in employee productivity for internal tools, metrics that show the software isn't just running, but actively delivering the intended value, achieving the strategic objectives.
And defining these collaboratively right at the start.
Absolutely. Define these outcome metrics collaboratively at the very beginning and use them as the primary gauge of success throughout. That's critical.
Okay, wow. We have covered a lot of ground today, really digging into the source material on why software projects still fall short in 2025.
We have.
We looked at how being fast doesn't guarantee value that illusion of progress. How doing agile rituals isn't the same as being truly adaptable agile theater.
The zombie teams.
The crippling costs of technical debt, the paralysis when code can't keep up with business pivots,
Big ones.
the critical need for empowered product leadership, the friction from misaligned team goals,
Yeah.
the trap of prioritizing tools over fundamentals, the self-sabotage of magical thinking and planning,
Deadline denial.
the damage from communication breakdown and stakeholder drift. And that fundamental failure, defining success by outcome, not just output.
The source makes a really compelling case, I think. The root causes of failure today aren't really about lacking access to the right frameworks or the best tools.
The tech and processes are out there.
They are. The failures persist because of more fundamental challenges, often non-technical ones.
Like,
A pervasive lack of focus on actual outcomes over output. Insufficient alignment and collaboration across functions, failure to proactively manage tech debt and build for resilience, and recurring issues around clear leadership, open communication, and realistic planning.
it powerfully reinforces that concluding thought from the source.
Yeah.
Just adopting Agile doesn't fix a bad strategy.
Yep.
Investing in the latest dev tools won't fix a lack of clear vision or effective leadership.
Tools amplify, they don't create.
And achieving high-velocity shipping code is meaningless if that code isn't actually delivering value to the user or the business.
Velocity isn't value.
Success in modern software development, the source implies, depends less on mastering ever more complex tech or process frameworks.
And more on getting the fundamentals right. Achieving clarity on objectives. Fostering courage to confront hard truths and risks. Cultivating true collaboration focused on shared outcomes. Clarity, courage, collaboration.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about, doesn't it? Building on everything we've discussed from the source today.
What's that?
Given the incredible technological capabilities we have in 2025, and considering how the sources consistently highlight these persistent, often non-technical issues, culture, communication, leadership, alignment as the primary culprits, does this mean that the biggest barrier to successful software projects right now isn't technical at all? Is it fundamentally human?
That is, yeah. That's a question that demands some serious reflection from everyone involved in the software world.
Indeed. Well, hopefully this deep dive into the source material gives you some valuable perspective, helps you maybe identify some of these patterns in the projects you encounter or are part of.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.